Have you ever walked away from a conversation wondering, why did I even bother? You brought facts, you stayed calm, you listened, and somehow they became even more convinced that they were right. You start explaining, they start defending, you ask questions, they repeat the same answers. The conversation doesn't move, it just goes in circles. And somehow you both leave even further apart than when you started. Most of us assume the problem is that we haven't found the right argument yet, the right evidence, the right words. But what if that's not the problem? History has wrestled with this question for centuries. Why do some people become so committed to an idea that changing their mind feels almost impossible? We usually call them fanatics, extremists, radicals. But labels don't explain behavior. So I started digging. Not because I wanted to learn how to win an argument, but because I wanted to understand what was actually happening. Because if I was making these conversations worse, I wanted to stop. And what I found surprised me. This wasn't just about fanatics or extremists or radicals. It was about something much more common. It was about what happens when an idea becomes part of who we are. And once that happens, you're no longer arguing with an opinion. You're confronting an identity. If you don't understand that difference, you'll keep trying to solve the wrong problem. At first, I assumed the answer would be simple. Maybe some people are just more stubborn than others. Maybe they're just unwilling to listen. Maybe they're simply closed-minded. But the more I looked into history, the more I realized those explanations didn't go far enough. Every generation has had people who seemed impossible to reason with, just like today. Religious movements, political revolutions, cultures, cults, nationalism, social movements, different centuries, different causes, the same pattern. And history tried almost everything. People have tried forcing others to change, shaming them, silencing them, debating them, even punishing them. Sometimes it worked for a while, but more often it made people hold on even tighter. That surprised me because it raises an obvious question. If facts don't work and force doesn't work, what exactly are we pushing against? That's when I came across an idea that changed how I think about difficult conversations. Most arguments aren't really about information, they're about identity. Think about it. If I challenge your favorite movie, you probably won't lose any sleep. If I challenge your favorite sports team, you might defend it, but eventually you'll move on. Now imagine I challenge something that's become part of who you are, your beliefs, your values, your political tribe, your worldview, your purpose, your community. Now the conversation changes because it no longer feels like I'm questioning an idea. It feels like I'm questioning you. And that's where communication starts breaking down. The moment an idea becomes part of someone's identity, disagreement starts feeling like a personal attack. Once that happens, people stop asking, is this true? And they start asking, how do I defend who I am? That's why bringing more facts often makes the conversation worse. Not because facts don't matter, but because facts are now competing with identity. And identity usually wins. Once I understood that identity changes the conversation, something else became obvious. Almost every instinct we have makes the situation worse. Think about what happens the moment someone says something you completely disagree with. Your brain immediately starts collecting evidence. You remember facts, statistics, stories, examples. You're preparing your case. It feels logical. It feels responsible. It feels like you're helping. That's when I realized something else. Facts alone rarely change people who feel they're defending who they are. And once I understood why, everything about difficult conversations started making more sense. Imagine someone walked into your house and said, everything you've built your life around is wrong. You're probably not going to respond with, tell me more. You're going to defend it. Not because you're irrational, because you're human. And that's why this isn't really about fanatics. It's about all of us. Maybe it's politics, maybe it's religion, maybe it's parenting, maybe it's your career, maybe it's education, maybe it's your favorite social cause. Whenever an idea becomes part of who we are, protecting the idea starts feeling like protecting ourselves. So if arguing harder doesn't work, what does? History points to something surprisingly simple. The goal isn't changing someone's mind. It's to create the conditions where change becomes possible. So if the goal isn't forcing someone to change, what is it? This was the part that surprised me the most. The people who are most successful at changing minds usually aren't trying to win arguments. They're trying to lower the threat. Think about it. The moment someone feels attacked, their brain shifts into defense. They're no longer listening to understand. They're listening for what to defend next. And once that happens, the conversation isn't moving forward anymore. It's digging trenches. That's why arguing harder rarely helps. Every new fact, every clever comeback, every attempt to prove them wrong can feel like another attack on who they are. You can't force someone to open a door. They're convinced you're trying to kick in. So what do you do instead? You become curious. Not fake curiosity, real curiosity. Instead of asking, how can you possibly believe that? Ask, can you help me understand how you came to that conclusion? That's a completely different question. One demands a defense. The other invites a story. Stories tell you something facts can't. They reveal what the belief is protecting. Sometimes it's identity, sometimes it's belonging, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's hope, sometimes it's years of personal experience, and sometimes it's pain. And yes, you may still disagree completely, but now at least you're talking to a human being instead of fighting an idea. And unfortunately, that doesn't guarantee that they'll change. In fact, they probably won't, at least not in that conversation. And that's another lesson history teaches over and over and over again. People rarely abandon deeply held beliefs because of one perfect argument. Change usually happens much more quietly. A question they can't stop thinking about. A contradiction they notice themselves. An experience that no longer fits what they believed. Most lasting change happens from the inside out, not from the outside in. That's why one of the most powerful communication skills is learning to leave space. Space to think, space to reflect, space to be wrong without feeling destroyed. Because the moment changing your mind feels like losing yourself, most people will choose certainty, even over truth. There's one more lesson I kept running into. Not every conversation is meant to end in agreement. Sometimes the best outcome is understanding. And sometimes even that is impossible. One of the hardest communication skills you'll ever learn is recognizing the moment a conversation stops being productive. Not because someone disagrees. Disagreement is actually healthy. Not because someone challenges you. That can make both of you better. But because curiosity has disappeared. Nobody is asking questions anymore. Nobody is trying to understand. Nobody is considering the possibility they might be wrong. They're only waiting for their turn to speak, or worse, their turn to win. That's the moment you have a choice. You can keep pushing, keep arguing, keep searching for the perfect words that finally break through, or you can recognize what the conversation has become. You're no longer exchanging ideas. You're witnessing two identities trying to protect themselves. And that's a battle words rarely win. Look, walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's just recognizing that the conditions for a real conversation just no longer exist. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop listening. And it certainly doesn't mean you stop thinking critically. It simply means you refuse to turn communication into combat. Because here's the irony. The people most convinced they're defending the truth are often the least willing to examine it. And if we're honest, every one of us is capable of becoming that person. That's the part history kept reminding me of. Every generation points to its fanatics, its extremists, its radicals, believing the problem always belongs to someone else. But history asks a different question. What happens when any of us become so certain that we stop being curious? Maybe that's the real danger, not having strong beliefs. Strong beliefs have changed the world for the better. The danger begins when protecting those beliefs becomes more important than discovering whether they're true. Maybe that's the real lesson. So the next time you meet someone who seems impossible to reason with, don't just ask, why won't they listen? Ask something harder. What are they protecting? And then ask yourself the very same question. Because I don't think the goal of communication is changing someone else's mind. I think the goal is making sure we never lose the ability to change our own. Protect your curiosity more fiercely than your certainty. Because the moment we stop asking, what if I'm missing something? We stop having conversations. We start protecting conclusions. And that's a road none of us should want to travel. If this video changed the way you think about difficult conversations, then watch this one next. Because now that you understand why some conversations become impossible, it's time to learn how to recognize the exact moment they close and what to do before they completely fall apart. I'll see you in the next one.